person that's, as Vicki is the DOT, Carl is the federal highway.
Very good analogy.
And they're like, he's based in Tallahassee, and they have no money either, so they so we use student for this company at every board meeting and from time to time at committee meetings, but now we hardly ever see him because he has no money. Travel is a luxury right now.
My travel budget is now, if I can be back, if I can leave and be back on the same day, you may go, but only if we have a car available to you. Which is why I didn't go to Orlando last week.
But I asked Carl to come talk to us because he's going to explain exactly what it means to be a TMA. It's very important to us that we understand this so that we can start preparing to utilize its full benefits.
Yes.
So.
Thank you. Very good introduction. Compliments to you. I also want to introduce, with me today is Regina Colson with Florida DOT, and she is based in Tallahassee, so we did the sensible and green thing. We carpooled on the way here. Now, because we are returning tonight after the presentation, I will be departing because I've got about a 3.5 hour drive ahead of me, and I want to make it back at some point here and try and squeeze in a dinner. It's not because of the company. Please don't take it that way. So let's jump into this and talk about why all this matters. Now, we're going to start with the basis. You are designated as an MPO or perhaps as a TMA based upon the census data that was collected in April of 2010. Okay? Why is this census data important? Well, first of all, it is the basis for many funding programs. Think about the number of federal programs that are based upon a per capita allocation. So that is very important when the census is done. In our case, for an MPO, it designates an urban area. That is, and you'll see it in a later slide, an area over 50,000 population that is what we'll call kind of contiguous. The next level above that is a TMA, and you achieve that by reaching a population of 200,000. So, let's start with some basics of what happened in Florida. From 2000 to 2010, the population increased by 2.8 million. That represents a 17.5% to 18% increase in the overall state population. And I remember back in about maybe 2007 or so, the statistic was that 1,000 people a day moved to Florida. So there was a rapid expansion. You also gained here in Florida 2 congressional seats, so you'll have better representation in Congress. And I do want to ask, I asked the previous meeting this question, every state increased in population except for one. Would anyone like to take a guess as to what state actually declined in population?
North Dakota.
Very good. Michigan.
Michigan.
Yes.
Wisconsin will be real close behind.
If they have a bad enough winter, it might do the trick. Okay. Well, the Census Bureau identifies with this data what they designate as urban and rural populations. They also designate types of housing and territory. Now, the reason for this is by having one unit of government or one entity collect all this data in a uniform manner, we can compare the data that's collected here in Lake County or in Sumter County or in Florida to another state, knowing it was collected in the same manner so that we can statistically compare growth rates from one area to another. And not only that, you can look back on previous census data collections and compare your own growth and look at what is happening where. You can even look within the region at populations of individual communities to see how they have grown. Okay? The urban areas are defined after each census. So let's talk a little bit about what is defined and what is the calendar of events for that. Top 2 items are the big one. Coming up in the spring of next year, between March and May, we will actually get a definition of what the urban area is, where we end urban and begin rural. and I'll show you in a future slide how that actually works. Then the following year, we should be getting the core-based statistical areas. Now, the difference between an urban area and a core-based statistical area is you can have two urban areas but have a strong connection between them through commuting patterns, business patterns, trucking or freight that moves between areas, that ties those areas together into one core-based statistical area, but two separate urban areas, okay? The Tampa Bay region is one big CBSA. They have multiple MPOs, they have 4 in the Tampa Bay region. And that is permissible, it's actually written into federal regs for transportation planning, that you may have more than one MPO per CBSA, and actually per urbanized area. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about urban versus rural. I've already mentioned that an urbanized area is 50,000 population or above, and then the TMA, of course, is the 200,000 plus. There's a concept called urban clusters, which identifies areas between 2,500 and 49,999. And that is to recognize that you have something going on, it just not has achieved this high a level. They do not require themselves to have an MPO. Both are based on population density. And that is the key element that defines whether you are urban or rural. And the next slide is going to show you how that is worked out. I'm going to repeat this a couple times through my presentation. The way this is done is through a computer program looking at those population densities, and the attempt was made, it started back in the last census in 2000, by using a computer to objectively look at this. It took out the subjectivity that had occurred previously, where everything was on a paper and somebody with a pen, pencil, marker, I don't know what, but had to start drawing boxes and calculating out. And if you've been working all day and it's now 2 in the morning and you haven't had enough coffee, you might miss something, or you might draw the line a little too far. This was an automated system that was used both in 2000 and 2010. So let's start with the graphic that's on the slide here. If you look in the lower right-hand corner of the block, you see a heavy dark outline going around an area. That represents an area that has a population density of 1,000 people per square mile, okay? That becomes your core, or your nucleus that you build off of to then start growing your urbanized area out. As long as you have that, you have the starter kit, we'll call it, to an urban area. And you do not have to use exactly a census block. You can use block groups as long as they are contiguous and can assemble together to get you to 1,000 people per square mile. Now, from that, we look to adjacent block groups that achieve at least 500 persons per square mile. And if you consider you have an urban downtown type setting with the smaller lots, and as you grow out from there, you might get into larger lots or less dense development. But nonetheless, that less densely developed area is a part of the urban area that you identify when you speak of a certain community. That is to represent that is still part of the urban area. You keep growing that out until you can no longer maintain population density of 500 people per square mile. And that draws the line between urban and rural. Now, there are some situations where it doesn't always quite work. So, you've heard me say it before, it's an objective and uniform classification system that is replicated anywhere you go in the United States. It's consistent, it's transparent because it's easy to explain, and it's used the same everywhere. It's also repeatable. After it's been done, if you had the same data, you would arrive at the same conclusion. The interesting part here is it says place boundaries are not taken into consideration. What that means is, if you said, my city boundaries go from here all the way up to Alabama, good for you. We're not going to count the farmland. It does not matter where the city has drawn a line for their zoning powers or their city services. It matters on population density and population density alone. Okay? Now, you get some funny things that happen in urban areas. You can get along a corridor a series of businesses, offices, industrial complex, car dealerships. Nobody lives there. What's your population density? Zip. Well, it's recognized that these are a function and a core part of an urban setting. So adopted into this was two concepts, hops and jumps. Okay, a hop is a half-mile hop, recognizing that on the other side we can find population density again. And so it allows that segment, that half-mile jump, or hop rather, to be incorporated. Now you might be going along and then it turns out that you've got a long stretch of 1.5 miles where perhaps a farm that's been in a family for a couple centuries, the people who own it are not going to sell and develop it. You are allowed a one-time jump along a roadway corridor of 1.5 miles. You can have multiple hops, but only one jump. And that accommodates that you may have development, particularly in your fringes of an urban area where a plot is developed and it's assumed it will fill in between. But it still captures that area that's out just a little bit. So we have that. One difference, in 2000, the jump distance was 2.5 miles. Made for some unusual looking urban areas with strange arms that went out. This is hoping to correct something that was identified as a bit of a goof in the last set of data when defining the urban areas. The last thing is, Census is going to use national land cover data to identify areas that simply cannot be built. And as I joked in the previous meeting, being Lake County, I expect to find lakes. We can't build houses in the middle of a lake. I would define that, and I'm pretty sure the Census Bureau would, as an undevelopable area. But it's still part of the urban area. Out in the west, in the Rockies, you may find areas that have such a slope that's impossible to build upon. Another aspect would be a major airport. I come from Chicago. O'Hare Airport would show up as a huge hole in the Chicago metro area because nobody lives at the airport. Nobody returned a census form saying, this is my address. So that will be used to then recognize areas that aren't developed for a very good reason. Okay, and again, in 2010, the goal was to remain committed to an objective, equitable, and consistent nationwide urban area delineation. Again, the consistency. What we see here in Florida is the same methodology used in Wyoming, Washington State, California, anywhere you go, same methodology. So we can compare apples to apples. They are using the same criteria, except for that jump, as was used in the 2000 census data, so that when you look at the 2000 census data and the 2010, you know you're comparing two like animals. And you can really do a good comparison of what kind of growth have we experienced here. And then there was that all potential modifications is the last bullet point here. The reason for this is simple. As the nature of urban areas grew over time, tweaks would be made to the data and how it was assembled and how it was analyzed. And that was done to reflect the changing nature of American society. One supplement / deficiency was that jump distance. Okay, so urban and rural issues. Want to identify the non-residential urban land uses. I mentioned the airport, manufacturing facilities that might be within an urban area. Okay, there's also a desire in the second bullet point here for very large urban areas to have an objective way of splitting them, because if you think particularly in the Northeast, you just have one continuous urban area. Where does Baltimore begin and DC ends and Philadelphia picks up and Boston and New York, and as you go along, where does it all begin and end, or is it just one big blob? So you have to cut that, because how are you going to get one MPO that covers all that area? It's not gonna work. That's not, yes, it's regionalism, but is it really addressing the needs of that area and that region known as Boston, that region known as Baltimore? Shouldn't be an issue here. And then again, I mentioned earlier, the identification of undevelopable territory. Okay, so here's the part that matters to you. When you become a TMA, what will that mean to this group? Well, first point up there is talking about the 3C planning process. As an MPO, you're already doing that. There's further emphasis upon this, and that's brought up in the next 2 points here. You'll be doing a congestion management plan. Now, that's not required for areas that are under the 200,000, but it was assumed in legislation that when you reach 200,000, you're now getting such a mass of people, you're going to have congestion issues. You need to think about it in a methodology or a system-wide way of how you're going to combat congestion. You'll write a plan that will help you to evaluate projects and can be used in assigning points to projects that may be entered into your TIP or your long-range plan, but it outlines a methodology for you to use in analyzing your congested corridors. And also you can talk a little bit about what are best approaches, what works here, what fits our needs for this region. The last point is the dreaded certification review. Every 4 years, Federal Highways and Federal Transit visit our TMAs, and it usually is a couple-day process on site and a couple months prior to that, where we inspect every document and interview staff, hold a public hearing, meet with committees, and go through the federal requirements to ensure that they are all being met by the MPO, which has now become a TMA. I will say it's an arduous process. It's one that I don't put at the list of my favorite job duties to do. But we've been talking, myself and staff here, in preparation for that. And staff from the MPO attended the certification review that was conducted for the Volusia TPO to see what one looks like. And actually, FDOT staff also joined us, very kind of you. So this will help in the preparation for this upcoming event. Okay, I'm sorry, yes, question, go ahead.
I understand the advantage of reviews. What's the normal outtake for that? I mean, are you finding horrible problems that TMAs are not taking care of business, or staff are uninformed, or what seems to be the gist of their problem, any problem that comes up?
I'll say this, the nature of federal transportation planning requirements, there are many. There's a lot of different little details, so it's very complex. There's an old joke, and I'll try to make an analogy with this, of the vehicle code is so complex that when you drive your car down the street, an officer who knows vehicle code could write you a ticket. There's always going to be something you're violating, no question. I hate to say, but our federal transportation planning requirements are similar to that. If we search hard enough, we can find something that is not meeting the intent or letter of the law. I can't say that there's any one particular area where we find this comes up every time. It moves around. Each MPO, you could say, has their strengths and their weaknesses, and it's not the same from MPO to MPO. You might go to a state where you found that the state DOT and the Federal Highway Office there did not emphasize or look at carefully enough a particular item, and go through that state to all the TMAs and find the same problem over and over. But once it's found, it gets written up and it gets corrected, and then the next time you go through, it's not an issue anymore. I will say this though, I've been on, I think I'm coming up on a dozen of these certification reviews. I've only been to one that didn't have a corrective action where it said, okay, we found nothing. Only one time. That's just how complex the transportation requirements are. But that's also why I've been working with staff so that, hey, don't be alarmed and don't be shocked if something is written into there, and we'll work with you ahead of time to help identify anything that we can get taken care of beforehand So at the time of this site visit, you're good to go. And so that's also going to, I assume, entail my coming to a couple of board meetings and sticking around before or after to visit with staff and ask about any concerns and address those.
Thank you.
My pleasure. And I appreciate the questions. It tells me that I'm not boring you to sleep. All right, so the policy board. When an MPO goes from non-TMA status to TMA status, it traditionally means that you've expanded your boundaries. And at that time, it's usually appropriate to go ahead and look at how is your board representing your area. Well, you're already covering all of Lake County and all of Sumter County. Therefore, you've designed your board to represent the area that will be beyond what I presume the census will define as your urban area. So you should already have this one covered without any difficulty. It will be prudent to go ahead and look at the data that comes out and go ahead and compare that to your board. That way you can say when you go to the certification review that, yes, we did look at that, but you should have that covered already. I have no concerns about that. Okay, I mentioned the congestion management plan. When does that have to be done? From the time of designation, this was in the 2000 census data when it came out, there was an 18-month clock put on a TMA to then produce a congestion management plan. These have been around for a while, so it will be easy that other MPOs and TPOs have developed these, and there will be different examples to look at and given guidance, we'll call it, as to what to do. It won't have to be reinventing the wheel here, so that'll be thankful. And it'll be something that presumably will come before this body as well as other committees before going to the governing board with an explanation of the document and the methodology. And then the one other item is, as I mentioned, that certification review. And the last time with the last census in 2000, I believe the window was also 18 months for, upon designation, for FHWA and FTA, because it's only those two arms of US DOT to come out and jointly conduct the certification review. And that concludes my remarks. Are there any questions I can answer for you, please?
That last comment, of the 18 months, getting it together in 18 months, and then you're gonna do a certification review at that time? Is that what
It'll be in that same 18-month window.
Okay.
And when did that window begin?
Not until, because designations won't come out until spring of
So
next year.
Designations
That
have
will-
not happened yet. Okay,
Yes,
gotcha.
and that will, and the
So
reason.
sometime in the next couple of years?
Yes,
Gotcha.
yes. And actually, what it is because of the explosive growth that you've had here, I'm not going to say that you are a TMA, but I'd wager on it. I'd bet money. I feel fairly confident that that will be the outcome of, you know, taking the core 1,000 persons per square mile and growing out. And I figured, you know, I'd like to get to you earlier rather than later, get you thinking about this. You know, this is part of the good planning. You know, have you all set to go, so when the designation comes, you go, yeah, no problem, got it covered. Yes, Pam?
I want to point out one thing and ask one question. Where he speaks of the policy board, we call that our governing board.
I'm sorry, yes,
Um,
yes.
And is there anything with regard to the certification, that you can say to the Citizens Advisory Committee with regard to their involvement or things that they need to contemplate doing? And we have a discussion item about our CAC goals in relation to what then you come in. I'm not expressing myself. How can we prepare? What is it that
What-
applies directly to them? What are some of those things that?
What can this committee be doing to work towards being prepared
So
for the
that when you
certification
come
review?
in and you got your little clipboard, you can't have any criticisms, or you can't give us a red X on anything that has to do with the Citizens Advisory.
Okay, that's a great question, because I'll tell you what, the one thing, and this is, I'll be very honest, this is not an official policy, but this is how Carl Mikyska sees the world of MPOs. I see the Citizens Advisory Group Committee as the lead for the public involvement plan. You know, I see that as your baby, the one that, you know, first stop it should make is here. I'd definitely be getting that out and going through it, so when we get to the certification review, it doesn't have 2007 on the cover, it's got 2012 or 2011 on the cover, and looking at, hey, in the process of this, are we engaging the public? You know, are the outreach tools that we're using, are they effective? Are they working? How are we going to measure that? And that's something that you all can look at. So definitely that. I think that would be a great first place to look. And that's a document that's near and dear to my heart. Yes?
How involved is the PIP for when we're converting to a TMA? Is that going to be give a timeline kind of thing? Is it every 6 months we're going to have a hearing or that sort of thing?
Well, one of the federal requirements is that when you're doing your public involvement plan, or also called your public participation plan, both terms are used. 45-day public comment period. 23 CFR 450.316, it's in there, 45 days. And I'm hoping that in the front of it, right there, right away, you'll say, we conducted a 45 or 60-day public comment period.
Minimum of 45 days.
Minimum of 45 days. So you'll have that to build into your time frame. The one nice thing is that while we require this from the federal side, the state of Florida is very gracious about saying we can do a better job of planning than the federal government requires. And so there are the requirements I have, and there's usually a few extra ones that the state of Florida has that have been passed through the legislature. It's not that just FDOT says, we feel like doing this today. So the state of planning in Florida is advanced. The state of public involvement is advanced. Did you know this committee, Citizens Advisory Committee, is not mandated in any federal document? But that's how strongly, whoa. That is how strongly the state of Florida believes in making sure that we engage citizens, that the legislature said, you're gonna start with a committee of citizens. I think that's pretty awesome. But again, this is near and dear to my heart, because I work for you.
Carl,
Yes.
you didn't talk about the good stuff. Money.
Yes, okay, money. All right, couple things. Basically, you have the pot of money that is the Highway Trust Fund, and it is allocated on a population basis. Now, we know the population has gone up. I think there was just a thing about 2 billion to 7 billion people in the world, and the U.S. has grown with that. You have grown here, I would surmise, more rapidly than other areas. So while there are more hands going into the pot of money, your hand got bigger than many of the other hands. And so I would assume that you're going to get more money out of that pot. Until we know the population numbers, and right now the trust fund sitting where it's at is not flush with money, but if a new transportation bill would also affect how that money is collected, i.e. is there a change in the revenue? But I would anticipate that your funding level will go up, and that includes not only your planning money that is used to run the operations of the MPO and make sure that everybody here gets paid, but also the construction dollars that you have allocated to the MPO for the governing board to then make project selection with your input when you do the TIP each year.
And that is separated from DOT.
It comes through DOT to you, but it is
But
money that is
it's
sent
money
here.
that we make the decision about
Yes.
what projects to spend it on.
Yeah, and I will give you a conversion real quick, and I'll be right with you on that.
Okay.
Hang on. We call it STP local, and when it gets to FDOT, it becomes XU funds, and that's the term you use. But if you go to look for it out there on a federal website, it'll be called STP-local.
SU or XU?
Yeah, SU or XU is the terminology used by the state of Florida.
X
Yes.
and then X, yes.
X or
Yeah,
S.
yes.
Do us a favor and don't send the money to the STTF because they keep reaping that thing all the time. Send it to, a community bank.
Well, and the federal dollars have to stay in transportation purposes.
I know.
So. Oh, I'm sorry.
So federal
Wrapped up?
dollars cannot be reallocated, is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Repurposed?
Correct. But keep in mind, the state trust fund does include state-generated dollars.
Right.
We do not dictate what is done with what we call locally, either at the state or the county or municipal level, but locally generated
Oh,
revenues.
I feel better.
So,
Madam Chair,
Don't give it to them.
it's part of the long-range plan. We estimated our XU dollars that come right to the MPO for prioritization, from the MPO. From 2014 to 2035, it's $60 million. That's an estimate, but those are funds come directly to the MPO for prioritization.
You said 60?
60, yeah. That's through 2035 though.
So
Yeah,
that's 2 million a year.
Yeah. And then what's interesting though is the other MPOs in our region,
No, it's more than that, it's 3
they
million.
prioritize those funds or they divvy them up. Like Metro Plan does 18% for transit, 25% for bike ped projects, and the rest go to capacity. And that's different in every MPO. I think Volusia County TPO, they can do 1/3.
30, 40.
Yeah, so 30% for transit, 30% for bike bed, and 40% for capacity projects. So, and that's a local decision, MPO board decision. So.
We have the control.
Actually, they do not, Volusia TPO has said they will not do capacity.
Okay.
Yeah, the last 30%, I believe,
Oh,
is
ITS.
ITS and
That's right.
safety,
Yeah.
which ITS is Intelligent Transportation Systems. The idea is signalizing lights so that you don't hit red light, red light, red light, you hit green all the way through. That is actually part of their congestion management plan. Starting to all tie together.
We're just learning how to do that before.
I find that Tallahassee needs a little education on that also.
I think the only town of any size close to us that has it is Gainesville, 34th Street. Then you can go right straight through that way, but that's the only place I know of.
Well, are there other questions I can answer for you?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I want to thank you
Thank
for
you.
allowing me to be here today. One, it's always nice to get out and, do something like this. I enjoy presenting. The other thing is, as is the nature of these sorts of topics, and I want to make this offer to all of you, should you, tonight on the drive home or tomorrow when you're brushing your teeth, say, oh, I should have asked about that, why didn't I think of it then? By all means, please contact one of the staff members. We'll get the question to me. If I have to research it, whatever it takes, we'll get you an answer. And then through the MPO, I'll get the information back to you. So don't feel like this is the last time we have this conversation. I'm available for any of your questions and would like to help you with that. Thank you, everyone. Much appreciated.
Thanks, Carl.
Thanks very much.
Have a great evening.
See y'all.